Hey guys, so in this video I'm going to talk about my keybind philosophy for Fortnite and optimal keybinds to become the best player you possibly can. This video will go pretty in depth, so I'll leave some timestamps in the comments and on the screen now for each subsection that I cover. You guys seem to really like the keyboard overlay from my 90s video, so I'll put it on your screen for this video as well. I'll start off with a little preface and introduction to why having optimal keybinds is so important. So when I say optimal keybinds, I mean the best keybinds for you specifically. There's no set of best keybinds that anyone should use, and that's simply just because everyone is different. Some people have shorter fingers than others, some people tilt their keyboards or play with their keyboards not on their desk, like Daquan. But my point is that you can't just go and copy your favorite streamer's keybinds because there's a really good chance that it won't be comfortable or optimal for you. After reading some of the comments on my other videos, there's likely a decent amount of you with suboptimal keybinds or people transitioning to PC and looking for better keybinds. There's even some of you who are good players and fast builders who have decent keybinds but could still benefit from optimizing them. You likely fall into one of these three categories if you started playing early on in the game, like before or during Season 3. A great example of this was Cypher PK, who switched his keybinds after playing for 10 months even though he had the most solo wins in North America at the time. This is his reasoning for it.
And then the biggest issue as well was when I went to go put down floors. I had floors on my number 2 key. And the problem with putting a keybind on your number 2 key is a lot of the times you reach over with your middle finger to press 2, but you also use your middle finger to move forward.
So Cypher's main problem was that he was not comfortable with pressing his wall bind, which was 2, with his ring finger while holding down W with his middle finger. This was a huge problem for him as he couldn't do a simple ramp rush with walls without letting go of W and jumping forward. This happened because when he first started playing in Season 1, nobody was ramp pushing or could foresee the building meta that would come to be in later seasons. But where he did screw up was waiting so long to actually change them, because by the time he did, people were starting to do 90s and more advanced builds. So I urge you all to be open to optimizing your keybinds and being open to changing them, because the longer you wait, the more you will fall behind and regress instead of improving as a player. So now we'll get into the tips and tricks. The first thing you should do right now is see what keys are comfortable for you. See how far your fingers can reach without coming off W and make a mental list of that in your head. Personally, I can hit most keys surrounding WASD except for Z and G, which for most people are pretty easy to hit, so I know that I shouldn't bind anything on these keys. But when I first switched over from console, G was bound to edit by default, so I knew I had to change that. After you do that, go into Playgrounds or Creative and do some simple ramp rushes or advanced builds and play around with all your current keybinds like you would in a game. Pay attention to any uncomfortable keybinds or keystroke sequences that you use, and lastly see how important the gameplay is that uses these keystrokes. So this could be anything from building sequences to just running and swapping weapons, and to even just crouching and uncrouching quickly. This will be important as we dive into each subsection of keybinds, starting first with optimal building binds. Your build binds are by far the most important keybinds you have, as building is easily the most important aspect of Fortnite now. My recommendation has and always will be to have each of the 3 major build binds, which are your wall, floor, and stairs, on different fingers. So I do this, and this means my wall is on my Q, which I press with my ring finger, my F is my floors, which I press with my index finger, and my stairs are my bottom mouse button, which I press with my thumb. You should be allocating your builds to your index finger, ring finger, and your 2 thumbs. And you can add some things to your pinky, but it will likely only be 1 or 2. Your cone is still equally important, but it doesn't need to be on its own finger, so I have mine on X, which is also pressed with my index finger. The reason that this is the most optimal is because you will always be faster pressing your builds with 3 different fingers than using the same finger to press 3 keys one after another. Think about your keybind sequence when doing 90s or protected ramp rushes. If you're pressing 2 build binds with the same finger, wouldn't it be easier and faster if you were using a different finger for each keybind? And the answer is yes, even if it's only slightly. In Fortnite, every second counts to win a build battle and get high ground or protect yourself if you get shot at. When Tfue changed his keybinds over the summer, he believed in the same philosophy and put each bind on a different finger. He still uses these keybinds and uses C for walls, which he hits with his thumb, E for floor, which he hits with his index, and Q for stairs, which he hits with his ring finger. And Tfue also took it a step further and put his cone on his mouse, which he hits with his other thumb. Using a different finger for each build is by far the most optimal you can get, but of course that doesn't mean that you can't be just as fast with numerous binds in the same finger, and this is shown by someone like Mongrel, who still has all of his keybinds on his mouse. Also, you can still achieve optimal keybinds by having them all on your keyboard, which is what Tfue does, so don't feel forced to use your mouse keybinds, but if you have them, I definitely suggest using them. Some specific keybinds I suggest are Q, E, F, R, C, and Shift, and your mouse buttons, as these are the closest to your strafe keys and the easiest to reach. After those, which are a little further away and harder to hit, are X, G, V, T, left alt, caps lock, and your number keys 1 through 5. But I suggest you save your number keys for your weapon binds, which we will discuss after. The last thing I wanted to touch upon was which finger you should use for some keys, and my suggestion is use whatever is comfortable. I hit C with my index finger, which is weird to many who hit it with their thumb, but I am extremely comfortable with it. Now I'll get into your edit, crouch, and interact keybinds, which are your next most important keybinds after your build binds. You should treat your edit bind somewhat similar to a build bind and put it somewhere close to your WASD, as you'll find it much easier and more comfortable to make edit plays if you have it on a good keybind. By default it is on G, but a large majority of pro players use F, and then some other ones to use are C, V, mouse button, and left shift. I use C after originally using Z, and I just really didn't like Z at all. It was pretty hard to hit, so after around 2 weeks of using that I switched to C and haven't looked back. Crouch is also a pretty interesting keybind. A lot of people who played other FPS games in the past have it bound to left control, so I was never comfortable with hitting left control, so I first started using C, and then when sprint by default came out I switched to left shift. And Tfue did the same thing, and I honestly think left shift is one of the best crouch keybinds you can get other than left control. You want to be able to strafe left and right while crouching, so you should be using your pinky or your mouse button, because if you use your ring or index finger you can't press A or D at the same time. You should also be pretty comfortable with crouch peeking on your crouch keybind, and the fastest way to crouch peek is by hitting crouch and spacebar to uncrouch, and then you can spam that sequence, so if you're not comfortable doing that you might want to switch it. Your interact keybind isn't as important as the other binds we've discussed, but it's still important in freeing up a good keybind, which is E. A lot of people, if they bind it to another key, will bind it to F because they're used to that from H1Z1, but if you're truly looking for an optimal keybind for your interact button, I definitely suggest using mouse scroll wheel up and down. This way you can just spam mouse scroll wheel up and down when you're in a 50-50 for a chest. There are many pros who do this or use other mouse buttons, and the reason it's so great is because it frees up E, which is one of the most accessible keybinds of your keyboard. And to wrap up this section, I want to talk a little bit more about sprint by default. So this is another case where the keybind is extremely accessible and comfortable for most people, and it's set to kind of a non-important function. The key here being left shift and the non-important function being sprinting because of sprint by default. By now, most pros use sprint by default, and there's honestly no reason that you shouldn't as well. You lose no control and there's no real use of walking in the games. If you're looking to get used to sprint by default on, something I suggest is to unbind it and then not rebind it. So as you get used to not hitting it, you'll still make mistakes sometimes, but because you haven't rebounded yet, you won't get messed up. Then you can introduce whichever function you are rebinding left shift to, whether that be crouching, editing, or your cone keybind. And by that time you should be used to not hitting it to sprint. Last thing I'll go over are weapon keybinds and some miscellaneous keybinds like traps, inventory, map, and others that I haven't mentioned. So for your weapon binds, I will always suggest to try and use as many number keys as you can reach comfortably. A lot of people don't like using 1 or 2 if they just switch over to PC because they don't have any finger dexterity yet, but you will thank me in the long run as your fingers will get used to it and reaching the number keys unless you literally physically can't reach them. I use 1 for my pickaxe and then numbers 2 through 5 for my weapons and then V for my 5th weapon. Most people can reach numbers 1 through 4 even with short fingers, and some other popular keybinds people use are Z, X, C, V, and your mouse buttons. If you physically can't reach the number keys, you're going to have to get clever and use some less popular keys for your weapon binds like left alt, caps lock, B, and N. This isn't unseen as a lot of great players like Nick830 don't use any number keys, but if you're switching over and can reach them, then I highly suggest you use them for your weapon binds. I have my pickaxe on 1, but many people have it on other keys like C or F for their mouse buttons, so just try and see which keys you have left over and which you can reach comfortably. The most popular trap keybind I've seen is T, and that's what I use it on, as it isn't too hard to reach and your trap keybind isn't as important as you may think, so it doesn't really need to be that close to WASD. Last are your inventory and your map. Most people have inventory on their tab, which is what I have, or I key, and you don't really need that to be near your WASD because you also don't move while it's open. And this is the same for your map keybind, which a majority of people have on M. Overall, these are my recommendations for finding your optimal keybinds. You should start optimizing with your build binds and then go over each of the other binds I talked about in order of importance. This is my philosophy for optimal keybinds, but there will always be cases like Mongrel who build with all mouse buttons and one of the fastest builders in the game. I think that these keybind suggestions will definitely make you a faster builder over time, but don't expect to change your keybinds and become a god overnight. It will take weeks and maybe even months to build back your muscle memory on new keybinds if you switch them or are just starting on PC. And the last recommendation is to get a mouse with at least 2 side buttons. If you have played MOBAs before, you may have MOBA mouse and can utilize all those extra side buttons for weapon binds and other things, but you definitely want a mouse with at least 2 side buttons to use for some keybinds. If this video helped you guys, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. This video shout out goes to my good buddy Kazaki, who helped me make this video and make numerous videos, and he also used code JERIAN in the Fortnite item shop. He just started streaming on Twitch, and I'll be starting to stream too, so make sure you follow both of our channels, which I'll leave a link to in the description. And that's going to be it for me, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.